Scene 1 unfolded the moment Ernesto Alvarado stepped onto the stage of Pinoy Global Talents, the lights casting a soft glow around his slightly trembling figure. At 54, with graying hair tucked neatly behind his ears and callous hands that spoke of decades of hard labor, he did not look like the typical contestant chasing fame. Instead, he looked like a man carrying a story too heavy to keep inside any longer. The audience, lively only moments before, gradually quieted as he walked toward the center. Every step he took felt careful, thoughtful, almost sacred, as if he were walking toward a memory rather than a microphone. His eyes, warm and tired, scanned the massive hall before finally settling on the judges' panel. There was a gentleness in his expression, the kind that comes from a heart that has loved deeply and lost painfully. When Simon asked for his name, Ernesto's smile wavered for a second, as though holding back a wave of emotion. "I'm Ernesto Alvarado from Quezon City," he said softly. His voice carried a trembling sincerity that pulled everyone closer. The judges noticed the old wooden guitar in his hands, its faded finish, its worn fretboard, the strings tuned with care that only someone who played with love could give. Simon leaned forward and asked, "Why are you here, Ernesto?" The entire hall grew still, all eyes fixed on him. Ernesto lowered his gaze for a moment, gripping the guitar as if drawing strength from something unseen. "I'm here," he began, voice breaking slightly, "because of my wife, Linda. She always waited for me at our door when I came home from work. Rain or shine, tired or sick, she stood there smiling. Last year, I lost her. And ever since then, every time I reach our door, I still feel like she's there, waiting." A soft gasp moved through the crowd. Some people covered their mouths. Others lowered their eyes in sympathy. The raw pain in his words filled the room like a quiet storm. Then he lifted his head again, and despite the sorrow pooling in his eyes, there was an unmistakable glow, love refusing to fade. "She always wanted me to sing again," he continued. "She said my voice could touch hearts. So today, this is for her." The camera panned across the audience, revealing teary faces, people already moved without hearing a single note. Even the judges, including the famously critical Simon, softened visibly. Ernesto inhaled deeply, as though gathering her memory into his lungs before breathing it out into the world. He adjusted the strap of his guitar, steadying himself. For a moment, he closed his eyes. The lights dimmed slightly around him, focusing a warm beam on the man whose heart was about to speak louder than his voice ever could. The stage, often a place of pressure, suddenly felt intimate, like the living room he once shared with Linda, where she used to sit on the couch and listen to him sing after long workdays. When he opened his eyes, they reflected both pain and strength. Not the strength of someone unbroken, but the strength of someone who has learned to keep walking despite the cracks inside him. His fingers brushed the strings lightly, producing a soft, trembling chord that echoed in the room before fading into silence. And in that silence, something powerful happened. Every single person leaned in, holding their breath, knowing they were witnessing the beginning of a performance that would not just be heard, but felt. Scene 2 began the moment Ernesto's fingers settled fully on the guitar, the quiet tension in the hall thick enough to feel. The first strum was soft, almost fragile, like a whisper carrying years of longing. But as the chords blended into the melody of "Still Waiting at the Door," something deeper emerged from the trembling notes. Ernesto was no longer just performing, he was reliving. Each line carried the weight of memories he had guarded for so long, memories that trembled inside his voice like a flickering candle struggling against the wind. The audience listened without a single sound. Even the cameras seemed to move more slowly, careful not to disturb the moment. His voice, aged but incredibly warm, cracked in places, but every crack felt like a window into his soul, revealing love that had never died. When he sang the first line about coming home to an empty house, the loneliness in his tone hit the crowd like a wave. People in the front row were already wiping tears from their cheeks. Others pressed their hands to their chest, feeling his grief as if it were their own. Halfway through the song, Ernesto's eyes glistened as he looked upward briefly, as though searching for Linda, imagining her smile shining through the stage lights. He swayed slightly to the rhythm, not for show, but because the music was carrying him through emotions too heavy to stand still. His voice grew stronger in the chorus, rising with pain, devotion, and the kind of longing only a man who has truly loved can express. Every word felt like a goodbye he never got the chance to say. The hall absorbed his heartbreak, becoming a silent witness to a love story carved deeply into time. By the second chorus, tears streamed freely down his face, but he kept singing, refusing to let the emotion break him. The judges watched in awe. No theatrics, no fancy runs, just pure truth. And it was that honesty, unpolished and vulnerable, that made the performance extraordinary. When his voice finally dipped into the last soft note, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was reverence. The kind of silence that says everyone in that room had just been changed, even if only for a moment. The final chord lingered in the air like a heartbeat that didn't want to fade. And then, suddenly, the audience rose to their feet, applause erupting with a force that overwhelmed the stage. But Ernesto, teary and trembling, simply closed his eyes and whispered one word meant only for her: Linda. Scene 3 ignited the moment the last trembling note faded, leaving Ernesto standing alone in a silence that felt sacred. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was as if the entire hall needed time to return to reality from the place his voice had taken them. Then, slowly at first, a single clap echoed, followed by another, until the entire audience rose to their feet in an explosive, heartfelt standing ovation. People were crying openly, wiping their faces without shame. Some pressed their hands to their chest, overwhelmed by the raw emotion he had poured onto that stage. Ernesto, still shaking, bowed deeply, clutching his old guitar as though it were the last thread connecting him to Linda. The judges exchanged stunned glances before Simon stood up, an action so rare that the audience gasped. He walked to the front of the panel, leaning closer as if talking not to a contestant, but to a man who had just changed the atmosphere of the entire show. Ernesto, Simon said, his voice low but filled with sincerity. I have heard thousands of singers, but very few make me feel something so human, so real, so heartbreakingly honest. Simon paused, studying Ernesto as if trying to understand how a simple man from Quezon City could deliver such emotional power. You didn't come here to impress us, Simon continued. You came here to honor love. And because of that, you've touched millions, even those who will see this long after tonight. What you did was a gift. A performance like that doesn't just stay on this stage, it follows people home. It stays in their hearts. The crowd roared with approval. The other judges wiped their eyes before giving their comments, each one echoing the same message: authenticity, love, and courage. When it was time to vote, the decision came instantly. For glowing yes buttons lit up the stage, sending beams of gold across Ernesto's tear-filled eyes. The audience erupted again, louder than before, cheering his name. Ernesto covered his mouth, overwhelmed, his body shaking not from nerves but from relief. Relief that his wife's memory had just been honored in the most beautiful way possible. He looked up toward the lights as if looking toward Linda, whispering a silent thank you. As he walked off the stage, staff members and crew reached out to congratulate him, some still wiping their own tears. Behind him, the audience was still clapping, still standing, still moved. Ernesto paused just before exiting, taking one last look at the place where he had poured out his heart. And in that moment, it was clear, this had not only been an audition, it had been a farewell, a tribute, and a healing all in one unforgettable moment.